You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
Or New Zealand?
I'm in Australia. It's the following day here. It's lunchtime or just after lunch
on Friday.
Yeah, so mhm. Mhm.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, December 11th, 2025 at 7:36 p.m. Pacific time. And we're coming to the end of the year rapidly, a little bit more rapidly than we might have had the holidays not fallen on Thursday. But the 25th we're not going to meet, and the 1st we're not going to meet. So this is the second to the last of the talks for this year. So I just thought I'd move the calendar up and talk about what I normally talk about 2 weeks from now, since we're not going to be able to talk about it in 2 weeks. And mainly it is the idea of, we call it intention setting, on New Year's Eve, setting intentions for the coming year, in some sense different than resolution setting. I really like resolution setting from the point of view of teaching meditation, because January is by far the highest enrollment that we have all year, and then it sort of peters off to the normal level in February. But people really make the resolution that they're going to practice, and they make a concerted effort to practice, and then they don't. I don't know if you have a history of making resolutions, but the only New Year's resolution that I've made that I've been able to keep is that I will no longer make resolutions. But intention setting is good. And I think that next week we'll talk about the reflection of the year that's gone. Intention setting for practice. What is it that you might like to have happen? It's an interesting thing, this conundrum that we live in, this human condition, in the sense that we live in the eternity of the present moment. It's just always unrelentingly the present moment. There's nothing else. In some sense, we can create this idea of what the future might be. We can reflect on what's happened, but that all happens in the present moment. It doesn't, we don't go into the future. We don't return to the past. And even in the way in which we experience the present moment is infused in this. So you might say that all of this exists in the present moment. The future, the past, and the present all exist at the same time. In the way that we make conceptual reality, the capacity to sense encounters an object that can be sensed. Consciousness of the sensing experience arises. This is before the self-experience knows what's happening. You might say in Western terms, this is still unconscious. The body evaluates whether it's urgent, needs immediate attention, whether it doesn't matter, whether we ever get to it. Is there time for a pleasant experience? And the brain science on this is pretty good. It takes about 3/8 of a second to create an urgent experience. It takes about a half a second to create a pleasant experience. The self-experience, of course, has to be created as well, and it takes about a half a second to create the self-experience. So we're all running that experience that we have of the self that knows what's happening, or at least is a witness to what is happening, runs a half a second behind what's happening. And then it has that marvelous capacity to just sort of nudge it a little. So we don't have the experience of witnessing what already happened a half a second ago. We think that we're experiencing it as it's unfolding now. But you can't play sports from the self. You become self-conscious and you stop playing well because the ball has already gone by a half a second ago. If you try to play from the sense of self, you have to play from not that self-experience, but from the actual self that's doing it, not the witness of what the self is doing. It's an interesting shift in perspective. This is what I'm doing. The self is the witness of what I'm doing. It's a fail-safe system, really. I think it's the veto system. I picture, do you know that sort of green color that metal things used to be painted? Maybe they still do paint them, but I always have this image of a metal sort of booth that's painted green and it has glass, and you're sitting there in a chair, and there's a countertop, and there's nothing on the countertop except a big red button that says veto on it. And something happens and the button starts to flash, and you have that 1 second you can hit the button and it'll veto the action. But if you don't hit it, you just engage in the action. So that if you step out of the booth for a minute and that thing starts to flash, there's nobody present to stop you from engaging in what I like to call a boneheaded move. And then you have to repair, you have to catch up. And while it is true that you can adjust something in a couple of seconds, if you wait till the next day, it could be a big issue in terms of what you do. How open are you to the experience of that authentic self experience, that activity of self, which the self experience knows? Because that self experience can also be highly filtered. We can really exclude from our sense of self, the witnessing self, what our actual motivations are pretty completely if we are conditioned to do that. I'm going to make recommendations for intentions that you might pick in my role as the teacher. But you, in the role of students, can do whatever you want. And it is always in the sense that life is short and brutish and difficult, and the purpose of life is to engage in activities that provide meaning. And so the intentions that I would recommend is to come out of the false, inauthentic self representations into the authentic expression of self. And mainly the person that you want to clue into this is yourself, that you allow a completely unfiltered experience of yourself to yourself primarily. Really sounds horrible, doesn't it? So that you know what to do. That's the idea. Of course, if you don't let yourself in on yourself, you don't know what to do. And you're stuck in this sort of dance of these limited forays into finding meaning that often don't pan out because you aren't really pursuing the things that would matter to you. And you're not pursuing the things that would matter to you because you're not allowing yourself to know what that would be. Is that making sense? I like to talk about it as a space that opens up. Really, if we think about the human condition, we were all born completely helpless, completely dependent on somebody to take care of us. than somebody to teach us how to manage life. We grew up in family systems which were embedded in small family societies, and then those family societies were then embedded in larger societies, and those larger societies then are the whole container of the culture that we're educated in. We understand how to operate in the world based on our instructions that we were given about how to manage the various levels of society and the culture that we grew up in. And most of us, because of the burden of learning how to operate in cultures, really know how to operate in the culture that we grew up in, and not much across that. So across a culture or across a society, language, custom, all that stuff we may or may not know. It even goes into facial recognitions. If you grow up in a segregated society where you see only one kind of person, you'll have dexterity in recognizing faces and facial expressions, and you'll be able to assign meaning. But if you don't grow up across culture lines, across race lines, you won't be able to detect facial expressions and body language. You'll be able to say with conviction that somebody in another race, they all look the same, because they do all look the same, because you can't tell them apart, not because they're not different, but because you don't have the skill to do it. Of course, we tend to split that part off and project it as a statement about the other one. Really, it's a statement about ourselves. Even in your own race group, it's very hard to recognize somebody you don't know. Eyewitness testimony is like completely inaccurate. The only people that you can reliably identify are people you already know. Anybody else you can't really reliably identify. Certainly not in a flash, not with a burst of emotion. You have the experience of yourself, which you learn in the mirroring expression of the caregivers who took care of you. And we really do begin by establishing a working model of ourselves, which is based on their experience of taking care of us. That means if you had a well-resourced, supported, capable caregiver, what was reflected back to you was that you were a delight and they were very happy to have you, and that you're awesome, and you would have built a whole self-structure around that concept, because that was what was coming at you from the caregivers. And if you had an under-resourced caregiver that had challenges, that found the duty of taking care of you to be burdensome, what's coming back at you is this reflection of you're a burden, you're difficult, you're demanding, you're too demanding, you're unreasonable. All of those things are what's coming in. That's what we begin to use to create the sense of who we are. And we can easily, in family systems, adopt that point of view and carry on with life as if that's actually how it is. And so part of this intention for authenticity is to actually begin to understand who we really are and how those reflections came at us and how we adapted to them, so that we can begin to remove from our sense of self other people's distortions of us, which is really what we want to do, and come into a place where we see ourselves clearly and what our interests and our capacities are, and how best we can engage in the world, so that those aspects are the ones that are primary. Is that making sense? The that this all happens so early is the thing, long before the self experience arises to help us understand what's happening with us. At about 18 months or so of life, the child begins to develop to the point that they can understand that they have an agenda which is different from the agenda of the caregivers. And they will then begin a process of attempting to uh, divide from the symbiosis and become autonomous. But for a lot of children, there isn't the support for autonomy. And so you stay in some way enmeshed with the caregivers. The thing that needs to happen in that autonomy is a space, the space between the child and the space between the caregiver, where you're free to play and to explore. That moment when your caregiver recognizes that you have an agenda that's different from theirs, and they support and encourage you in discovering the things that matter to you. That space that opens between you and the caregiver that allows that creative play to happen is essential in understanding who you are authentically, what matters to you authentically, and really allows you to begin to develop these capacities for that exploration. But that's only for the kids where there's some recognition of their autonomy and some recognition that their agenda has value and an interest in the caregiver and what the capacities of the child are and their active protection of that space so the child doesn't have to be vigilant to the environment and they can come into a place of freedom and expression. When that doesn't happen for you as a kid, that space is never really protected. You're never really free to disengage from monitoring the environment that you grow up in. You don't get the opportunity to really touch into what is authentically yours and to begin to develop that expression of an authentic self. What happens instead is you develop a sense of self that you need in order to survive in the family system that you grow up in, which we might call a false sense of self, the self that's necessary for the family system. And in the process of that creation and the process of that development, you really begin to focus and develop on the skills that are required of you by the caregivers and by the environment that you are in. And so this is the thing that I want you to begin to examine. So I want you to make the intention to be willing to examine it. As I like to say, you're 18 months old and you can crawl at a pretty good pace. You might even be able to balance yourself on the furniture, but the bipeding is a little wobbly. The emotional regulation capacity so that you can separate from your caregiver and come back needs to be supported and developed in order for you to be able to do that. And that constant reassurance that you need needs to come reliably enough so you don't worry about it. But if that doesn't happen, of course, it truncates all of that. Uh, at 18 months, did you say, well, I can see this isn't going very well. You guys really need to step up your game because I'm about to take a hard turn into a false identity to satisfy your demands. And the cost of that over the course of my life is going to be unspeakably large, and you shouldn't do this to me. Probably didn't say that. Probably didn't know to say it because the world was so frightening. You just needed some safety and some reassurance. That only came from abandoning yourself. This will create what I like to call the terrible sadness in people. And one of the reasons why it's challenging to turn toward your authentic experience of who you are is because you inevitably bump into this terrible sadness. In childhood, of course, the bumping into it was terrifying, this overwhelming sense of sadness. But as an adult, it's not. While it may still have that juice, that energy of that level of fearfulness, it isn't unmanageable in the same way. You can develop emotional regulation skills where you can hold that sadness, and you don't need to avoid it in the same way that you did in childhood. And the reason that you want to not avoid it is because it is actually the way out of the inauthenticity. If you can sit in it and not need to get away from it, then all of the defensive structures that you had that protected you from it, you don't need anymore. So a little bit of titration, I think, is useful. Susie? You're muted.
I'm just really intrigued by this because the way you put it today is, I don't know, it made me think, gosh, how would I be if I was just allowed to be? Like it's almost unthinkable to try and even imagine that.
Right.
Because of some very rigid ideas of how people should be. And so you can interrogate that, but it seems almost impossible to even like I can't even begin to imagine how I might fully be able to be that person because those influences I mean I do an all right job of being a loudmouth and all the things I wasn't meant to be really in a way but I guess with friction like with
Yeah.
and so much less so now that I'm older and all those things but yeah to just think gosh who would I have been if I
Right.
didn't have those influences. It's mind-boggling. So I'm just interested in your take on that. How do you do that?
Well, part of it is the sadness, of course, because one of the things that we tend to like to do, I guess it's one of those things where momentarily it feels better, but in the long term is a disaster. Is the consequences of that we're being so different than who we might have been, so different in fact that we can't even imagine what it would be. There's a loss in that, an actual tangible loss of what that might have been, which we'll need to be able to experience in order to allow us to be free to do it. And it doesn't come without reassurance from the people that are close to us. So this is part of the development of a social network that actually is interested in you being able to take those risks to figure out what that would be. We can't really do it alone. The and the conditioning around it is going to be pretty tough. If you have some consciousness of the process, your authentic response, if you still have some awareness of what that is, arises in consciousness. And if you're afraid to express that, that is to say that it would be rejected socially or you'll be abandoned socially, you're going to have an immediate spike of abandonment terror. And that spike of abandonment terror is going to shut down the authentic expression. And then the inauthentic, false self, acceptable response is what's going to arise in consciousness. And if you push into that, the delusion, of course, is that you're supporting the relationship by being inauthentic. A little while later, the abandonment terror is immediately quelched by that. You express yourself inauthentically, the abandonment terror goes away, which reinforces the delusion that this is actually preserving the relationship. But a little while later, you're angry that your authenticity has not been expressed. Then even if your needs are met, the inauthentic needs are met, they're not the authentic needs and they're not satisfying in a deep way. So it kind of fuels a craving that arises for the authentic needs to be met. If you can manage the spike of that abandonment terror well enough, it will dissolve, and then you're hit by the sadness that for so much of your life you abandon yourself in order to maintain that inauthentic presentation. And if you can get through that, then you come into a place of authenticity, so that there's a repetition to this. You repeat the authenticity and you bear the abandonment terror and you bear the sadness, and then in the next iteration the response is diminished, and then in the next diminished, and then diminished, and then all of a sudden you've reclaimed that capacity for authenticity, and there isn't that reaction to it. In fact, if you pick the people around you well enough that are supportive, what you begin to anticipate is that they'll be delighted that you've expressed yourself authentically. Now, my friend Jimmy used to say, how do I know what I think until I hear what I say? Mm-hmm. That's spontaneous, right? You begin to allow yourself to express yourself spontaneously, and then in the expression of it, evaluate how authentic it is or how inauthentic it is, without that pre-filtering that makes everything inauthentic. And then
I get this is tricky though, for me, because I don't have much of a filter, right? Like in certain situations, I guess I've gotten better at monitoring, but that's where I find it tricky I feel like there are definitely times when I'm inauthentic, like or have been more so, to fit what I think somebody else wants. But I don't feel like it's constant. So I think that's where I'm getting confused. So maybe it's like we're talking about certain scenarios, not necessarily all the time.
Well, I think the mechanism is there.
Yeah.
If your reaction to something is not conditioned that that's not acceptable, there's not going to be so much resistance to it. It's only in the areas where you have a lot of conditioning that what's actually authentic for you is not acceptable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Like being outspoken, right. For example. Yeah. Yeah. As a female, particularly, So, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of conditioning around that. Yeah, the gender stuff is just amazingly complex. We might think that it's fairly simple, But my God, they hold you upside down 10 seconds after you come out of the womb and your gender training begins. and then it's not universal, right? It is the gender of the family system you grow up in, the gender roles of the family system you grow up in, and what the capabilities are or incapacities are that are built into that, and what's expressible and what isn't expressible.
Absolutely. It's huge in my family.
Yeah.
Enormous. The role of women being carers.
Yeah. Which is good. Then the men have to be taken care of, right? Which is an equally confining role. And then the distribution of care, which is, women are often burdened with an unfair amount of care that they're supposed to provide. And men are often excused from having to provide reasonable care, which creates they're in my family, resources was what men were required to provide, not much else, really. But it's not adequate, not even close to adequate for somebody else to thrive in that. So, yeah. The other piece is how well did you fit into the offering that you had, right? That's the other piece. Was it an easy fit, so you didn't notice what got clipped off, or did you just not fit in the box at all? And then in my case, for instance, my mother raised me as a girl for the first 2.5 years of my life because she wanted a girl. And so all of those pictures of me as a young kid, it's a little off in terms of how I'm appearing. And that my sister was born, and I flipped into the role of the male, which is quite an interesting diversion, confusing. And then that was followed by a lifetime of criticism for not being masculine enough. So it was just painful, the whole thing, and confusing. Couldn't figure it out. Then, how do you do it now? Really, this is what I'm suggesting is, how do you do it now so that it actually fits well, that you fit well in it, and then that you're comfortable, and that you're able to ask authentically for the things that you need. And not that you get them, but you have a much better chance, an infinitely greater chance of getting the things that you actually need if you actually ask for them, rather than asking for something else and hoping that they'll intuit magically what it is that you really need and give you that instead, which people don't tend to do. One of the features of humanity is not being that good at reading other people's minds. When Dan was alive, he said that he got all of the secret teachings of the Bond tradition, except being able to read other people's minds, which I thought was the one secret teaching that I would really like. But then he said, actually, it just makes you completely crazy to actually know what other people are thinking. It's a better way to go not to. Just get them to tell you what they want you to know. And then, of course, consent is the other piece of it. You need consent to express yourself at levels of intimacy to other people. And you need to give consent for people to express themselves intimately to you. And you need to negotiate a good representation of what you want that to be. So make the intention to express yourself authentically. That would be my suggestion. And then monitor whether you're doing it or not. And understand that the choice is not inauthentic or authentic. It's to limit the intimate expression, intimate, authentic expression so that it's appropriate to the agreement that you have, rather than going into inauthenticity instead. So there's lots of different kinds of relationships. In a simple viewing of it, if you have an agreement where you're going to tell somebody everything, then you have to tell them everything, which would be the authentic expression. But if you don't have that agreement with somebody, then you get to tell them what you want them, what you want to express. There's no obligation in authentic expression to be completely and unabashedly authentic. You're authentic in the context of the relationship. Susie?
Can you say that sentence again? You said limit the intimate expression to something, and it really resonated with me, but I lost it.
Okay. There is no obligation to be completely transparent and open authentically with everyone.
Okay, so you were saying the same thing again. Okay, all right, got it. Thank you.
You need to match the agreement of the relationship with what you disclose. And people are entitled to consent to it or not consent to it. And you're entitled to consent to it or not consent to it. One of the things that happens quite a bit is that if you are too socially isolated and you have a circumstance where you can begin to express yourself, you can overexpress yourself, and you'll notice that that's followed by a fearfulness that you've disclosed too much, and it creates an abandonment experience because of it. You worry about it, and really, what a skillful way of engaging is to moderate the level of disclosure that matches the terms of the relationship, rather than going into an inauthentic expression instead. You can be authentic in whatever the terms and conditions of the relationship is without being inauthentic. Christian, although I'm bracing.
What if you lived in a city of sufficient size and you could just go to different groups and overshare and you just got used to oversharing and you got used to that you just kind of drained the emotion out of that?
Would have to be a huge city. But wouldn't you be lonely just going from group to group without actually getting to know anyone?
That's a good point.
One of the things that insecure and disorganized people do is they tend to have a lot of abandonment fear. And so one of the ways that they regulate the abandonment fear is by oversharing. It's a strategy, actually. I worry that if you really knew me, that you would abandon me. So I'm going to tell you every bad thing about myself in the first few conversations, so that if you don't leave, I won't have to be afraid that if you found this out about me, you would leave. But what you don't really notice in doing that strategy is that if you overrun somebody's boundaries in the process of oversharing, secure people in particular won't put energy into the relationship because you don't respect their consent. And so what you end up doing is forming relationships with people that don't really have operational consent, because they're the ones who will stick around for their consent being violated. Anybody who has an operational sense of consent, if you violate it, they don't pursue the relationship. But if you don't have much of a sense of what your own capacity to consent, and you don't have, as a result of that, much respect for other people's consent, you end up in relationships where consent is constantly violated because neither of you really have operational consent. Susie?
I think I'm getting what you're saying. So I just am sort of sense checking. So if we try to be the person we would be if we weren't limited, then that's as much about looking at the motivation for why we're sharing what we're sharing, as opposed to just what we share or how we turn up. You might say, I'm being completely authentically me, but it's sort of inappropriate to be that authentically you because you're oversharing, because there's a motivation because of the abandonment fear. So it's not really just about how authentic you are in a moment. It's like unpacking it a bit further than that.
Well, I would say that that's inauthentic because the drive is not for the communication, it's for something else, and it's implicit. You're doing that to assuage the abandonment fear, but you're not saying, I'm having abandonment fear and I need reassurance, right? So it's inauthentic. The expression is inauthentic. Christian?
It would this one's serious. It would seem like
I would tell you, I do want you to really get how totally delightful I think you are.
Oh yeah. It would seem to me that that kind of oversharing, I don't know, maybe I have a wrong conception of this, that only people that are very avoidant, because they don't really care what the actual person's expressing, they just care about the proximity. They wouldn't care about the oversharing. So that would kind of set that kind of dynamic up, that people that have an avoidance strategy would be the ones that are okay with that, whereas people that are secure, or maybe even preoccupied, might be bothered by that.
What I would say is a dismissing person is going to juice you. And so the oversharing is the mechanism of juicing. But they're particular about the kind of juice that they want. And so they're going to set you up with a series of questions around what kind of juice they want. So that if they like sadness as a juice, a flavor of juice, they're going to start asking you questions about things that are going to produce you a sadness in you that you then express. So they're not so passive in the juicing. They're stealthily directing you toward it. They'll say, "Oh, that must have been so terrible," and then they'll get this compassionate, sad look on their face to elicit you to provide the juice, the flavor of juice that they want. So, so I'm just trying to say that it's not so haphazard with them. Where it really is haphazard is to disorganized people, because the social isolation of disorganized people puts a lot of pressure on them. And the way that the pressure works is they're constantly in their minds, they're constantly churning thoughts and things that they imagine expressing to people. And then when they find somebody who offers just a modicum of ordinary kindness, it's so intoxicating to them that they just gush. And because another disorganized person is not going to have such great boundaries around it, the follow-up questions and engagement might open you to a level of intimate discourse that is unprotected, which then results in the fearfulness.
So can you overshare, like, sorry, can you genuinely just be an open person and comfortable? Like, it's about the emotion and the motivation as well, isn't it? Like, you can be comfortable sharing things about yourself that somebody else might not be comfortable sharing about themselves. And you've tuned into the situation and you're getting the right signals that that person is comfortable with that.
Right.
So it's very context dependent, and some people are going to be much more comfortable with sharing stuff. But if there's that loaded motivation and there's a level of emotional charge with what you're sharing, then that is what creates an
So
oversharing
there's
situation.
the
Yeah.
broad permission, but there's also the specific permission for that moment, both of those, consent. But also, um, you need to have the level of freedom to express or not express, and the other person has to demonstrate their trustworthiness, because whether we like it or not, certain informations can be compromising socially, uh, or you could open yourself to harm, uh, so that you need to be also self-protective in developing relationships. And so the main process then in engaging new people is you give them a piece of yourself that would require trust and care, and then you see how they do. And if they do well, then you offer them a greater level of trust, and if they do well with that, you move forward. And you're paying attention to that so that you're never putting yourself at risk unnecessarily for somebody. And the people that you're really open with have demonstrated practically that they're trustworthy. It's the rushing in the beginning where you disclose too much information, even if it's over a short, a period of months or so, that you then would also constitute a kind of oversharing or too rapid sharing, which is meant to relieve the abandonment terror. So I like to say you need to know somebody for about a year minimum before you're in a place where you're fully disclosing, I would say. And even that might be too fast. You want to see them and how they operate and how protective they are of you. Remember that what we want is the space, that creative exploration space to open, which opens between people. And we need to be free of vigilance of them. We need to be settled and confident in their protecting us in order to then settle into that space where you go off and explore and discover and come back and express to them, and they receive it, and they go off and explore and come back and express to you in that space. And that exchange of exploration is really the whole point of it. But that space doesn't open if you have to be vigilant about whether they'll show up reliably or not. That makes sense. So the year or two is a good model. The first few months is just, do I feel regulated by them or not? That regulation piece is essential for the exploration piece, because you need to be able to come back completely demolished, and that they, just in being with you, are able to help you bounce back, which is autonomic. It's unconscious. It's automatic. Then you can get on to, how do I like to take care of, do I like to take care of them in the way that they need? And I'd like to start there, because if you don't like to take care of them in the way that they need, you're not going to do enough of it. And they're never going to settle, because they'll be bereft of care. And then you can get on to will they take care of me in the way that I need? And if all of that's there, then you get to the big piece, which is, is the thing that I need to explore close enough to the thing that they need to explore, so that there's a real synergy between our two explorations, so that not only are they excited to hear what I found out, but what I found out is going to be helpful for them in their exploration. And not only am I excited in finding out what they're exploring, it's going to be helpful to me in my exploration, so that there's an additive to it. That makes sense. Because then you can really get into the place of risking big enough to discover the things that you need to know. And without that, it's hard to do. It's hard to explore on your own without that safety net, that social network safety net, because the willingness to take those big emotional risks in what you're doing, if it's dysregulating and you don't have anyone to help you, you begin to avoid taking the risks that are that dysregulating. And so you make smaller risks, which means, in some sense, smaller rewards. It's not like tech. And it's easy enough to get into a place where you don't risk enough. And so then you're bereft of meaning, which is that despair. I like to call it the creeping despair that grabs you through the floorboards. What do you say we do a little practice? Insight, heart, or ideal parent? Was that insight? Ideal parent? Ideal parent? All right, here we go. How's that? So we're toward the end of the year. The last thing that's happening this year is our retreat. If you're interested in that, please sign up for it. It's the 29th to the 2nd. And then we have level 1 starting in January. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you can, you'll support us. It helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. There's a link on the website for donation. Happy to have you here and practicing. Good to see you. I will see you soon.